In the shattered cradle of the nine realms, where the winds howl through the boughs of the world tree Yggdrasil, and lightning dances across the endless skies, a child of great power was born, Thor, the god of thunder. His father was Odin, the wise and cunning All-Father, ruler of the Aesir gods. His mother was Jord, the primal goddess of the earth, who cradled valleys, rivers, and forests within her being. From the union of sky and soil came a son whose strength would shake mountains, and whose name would echo across all realms. From the moment of his birth, nature responded. Thunder rolled in the heavens. Rain fell in a silver cascade. The very clouds gathered in celebration and awe. Thor, red-haired and fierce-eyed even as a babe, was unlike any god who had come before. As he grew, he drank the milk of a giantess goat, his appetite insatiable and his energy untamable. Even among the gods of Asgard, Thor stood out. Taller than his peers, his arms like iron-bound trunks, and his laughter loud as the thunder he would command. He was a force of nature incarnate. But it wasn't just his strength that set him apart. It was his sense of honor, of duty, and an unshakable will to protect. To the smiths of the dwarves, the most skilled craftsmen in all the realms, a commission was given by Odin and Loki. From their hammers and forges came a weapon worthy of a storm god, Mjölnir, the short-handled hammer that could level mountains and return to its master when thrown. It was unbreakable, imbued with the lightning of the heavens themselves. It could bless and destroy, protect and punish. With Mjölnir in hand, Thor became not only a warrior but a symbol of divine power, of courage, and of unyielding resolve. He was not alone in his adventures. At his side galloped two mighty goats, Tanngrisnir and Tanngnjóstr, who pulled his chariot across the sky. When he rode, lightning flashed across the clouds and thunder cracked, signaling to gods and mortals alike that the protector of the realms was near. From the icy wastes of Jotunheim to the golden halls of Asgard, stories of Thor's strength spread. The people of Midgard, the world of humans, looked to him for protection from chaos, praying that his hammer would shield them from dark storms and darker foes. But even as Thor's name inspired fear in his enemies, among his kin he was loved. Not for his strength alone, but for his loyalty, his honesty, and a spirit unclouded by deceit. While Odin plotted and Loki schemed, Thor remained steadfast, a beacon of simplicity in a realm of trickery. He was, in every way, the storm-born god, not born to rule, but to serve, not to seek glory, but to answer its call when needed. A guardian, a warrior, a son of thunder and earth. And thus began the tale of Thor, the mighty protector whose footsteps shook the skies. In the primal stillness before the first thunder cracked across the nine realms, the fabric of fate stirred. The world tree, Yggdrasil, trembled at its roots and leaves shimmered with anticipation. For a storm was coming, not of destruction, but of divine purpose. It began not with conquest, but with birth. Thor was born in a time of deep unrest, a child of contrast and cosmic power. His father, Odin, was the all-seeing architect of fate, king of Asgard, keeper of runes, and seeker of secrets. The journey had just begun. Deep in the subterranean forges of Nidavellir, where the fires burn with the heat of dying stars and the anvil rings like distant thunder, the dwarven brothers Brokkr and Sindri toiled under divine challenge. Tasked with creating a weapon fit for a god, they summoned the oldest magic and metals drawn from the roots of Yggdrasil itself. From their labor was born Mjölnir, the hammer of the gods, a short-handled, rune-etched relic forged from enchanted Uru and cooled in celestial flames. It was not only a weapon of destruction, but a symbol of power, balance, and divine judgment. When Thor first grasped Mjölnir, the skies rode as if in approval. Lightning cracked through the heavens, splitting clouds as the thunder god raised the hammer high for the first time. It was a perfect extension of his strength and spirit, loyal, furious, and unwavering. With Mjölnir, Thor could summon storms, flatten mountains, and hurl it across realms, only for it to return obediently to his hand. But the hammer was more than a tool of war. It was a shield against chaos, a beacon of hope for mortals, and a sacred heirloom for the gods. Thor wielded it to crush the invading Jötnar, to guard Midgard from frost giants, and even to quell discord among the Aesir. On one fateful day, he shattered the bones of an earth-bound serpent that had devoured entire villages, raising his hammer in defiance as the beast's body coiled around him like a living mountain. Every clash of Mjölnir against enemy steel echoed through the 9 realms. Children sang of it. Warriors feared it. The Jötnar cursed it. Even Loki, ever the schemer, dared not face it without tricks and illusion. Wherever the hammer flew, lightning and justice followed. And with each battle, Thor's legend grew, not just as a warrior, but as a protector of realms, a living storm walking among gods and men. In the heart of Nidavellir, where suns never rise and the light comes from lava rivers flowing beneath obsidian bridges, Thor ventured into the ancient forge of the dwarves, master smiths older than some gods themselves. He was not sent, but drawn by prophecy, whispered through Yggdrasil's roots and heard only by Odin and the Norns. There, Brokkr and Sindri, dwarven brothers whose craft could rival divine power, accepted the challenge to forge a weapon worthy of the storm-born god. With hands scorched and eyes glowing from the forge's inferno, they combined raw metal mined from stars long dead and enchantments woven into the very breath of the world tree. Out of heat, pressure, and impossible craftsmanship, they birthed Mjölnir, the mighty hammer, so heavy no giant could lift it, yet so obedient it would return to Thor with a mere thought. Thor held it for the first time with a mixture of awe and hunger, the kind of reverence that a warrior has when meeting his destiny. At that moment, thunder rolled across every realm. From Midgard's rain-drenched cliffs to the icy peaks of Jotunheim, even the ground trembled at the hammer's awakening. Lightning spiraled upward into the clouds like a serpent set free. The skies themselves acknowledged Thor as more than a brute of muscle and pride. He was now a force of nature, a living weapon whose presence could tip the scales of cosmic balance. Mjölnir was more than a tool of destruction. It was a covenant between power and protection, meant to strike down those who threatened the harmony of the realms, yet also to bless, consecrate, and sanctify when wielded with wisdom. With Mjölnir, Thor's myth began to outpace his presence. Tales spread across realms of how he shattered an entire army of ice giants in a single strike, how he split a storm in half to rescue a ship of drowning Midgardians, how he silenced rebellions in Asgard with thunderous judgment. His enemies feared the sudden crack of lightning, not just for the storm that followed, but for the god who would arrive through its heart. And yet, despite the glory and fear Mjölnir brought, Thor wrestled with its burden. With such a weapon, he was not merely a warrior. He was now a symbol of balance, of wrath, of divine order. But Mjölnir was not forged in peace. Loki, ever the whisperer of chaos, had tampered with the forging process, hoping the hammer would be flawed. And though it emerged with a shortened handle, the gods saw it as destiny, not defect. A reminder that even perfection in divine hands comes with quirks. That power must be wielded with adaptability. Thor embraced it. He did not complain, for he was a god born not in comfort, but in storms. The hammer's size didn't matter. Its power was absolute. And so Thor, son of Odin, bearer of Mjölnir, stormed across the 9 realms with a renewed purpose. The age of wandering brawls and reckless battles was fading. A new chapter was beginning, one of guardianship, legacy, and storms yet to break. For beyond the horizon, darker powers stirred, and Thor's destiny with Mjölnir had only just begun. With Mjölnir in hand and storms swirling in his wake, Thor emerged not just as Asgard's fiercest warrior, but as a living tempest, a god whose name was spoken in reverence and fear across every realm. His arrival was often preceded by the low rumble of thunder on clear days and bolts of lightning that split the skies like divine warnings. In Midgard, mortals built altars of stone and fire to honor him, offering prayers before battle or storm, while in Jotunheim, giants murmured his name like a curse, warning their young of the red-cloaked thunderer whose wrath could level mountains. Thor became the Stormbringer, guardian of the fragile order that bound the 9 realms. When the fire demons of Muspelheim began to breach the barriers between worlds, Thor descended like a lightning strike, Mjölnir crackling with celestial fury. He shattered their fiery siege upon Vanaheim, sealing the rift with thunder so loud it echoed for days. In Alfheim, when the light elves feared the encroaching shadow of Svartalfheim, it was Thor who rode through the stars on his chariot, pulled by the goats Tanngrisnir and Tanngnjóstr, summoning storms to banish the darkness back into its depths. Each realm faced its own chaos, but Thor's arrival meant salvation or retribution. Yet Thor's thunderous path was not without cost. His growing power stirred ancient fears among even the gods. Odin saw his son rising not just in strength, but in influence, his name carried across realms on tongues and wind alike. Whispers of prophecy spoke of a day when Thor's rage could spark the very twilight of the gods. Ragnarok. But Thor was not driven by conquest. Beneath his booming laughter and storm-born pride lay a protector's heart. He did not seek war, he answered it. He did not rule, he shielded. Still, there were moments when thunder cracked too loudly, when his strikes were too swift, too merciless. In his pursuit of justice, Thor sometimes mistook vengeance for order. A rebellion in Niflheim was quelled with such force that the realm's very mists evaporated, leaving behind silence where frost spirits once danced. For all his might, Thor remained a being of passion, and passion, even in divine form, could burn too hot. He began to see that power alone could not keep the realms in harmony. It needed purpose, wisdom, balance, and so Thor began to seek not just enemies, but understanding. He listened to the seers of Vanaheim, debated with the sages of Midgard, and stood silent before the world tree, Yggdrasil, feeling its ancient pulse. For the first time, the god of thunder began to wonder. Was he the storm, or was he its master? This question, left unanswered, would carry him into the next phase of his tale, one filled with trials not of might, but of heart. For even gods must learn the weight of their thunder. After claiming Mjölnir and proving himself before gods and giants alike, Thor did not rest. The hammer, once in its stone, now thrummed with divine power in his grasp, echoing his will and magnifying his emotions. Wherever Thor went, the skies churned, and storms were no longer just weather. They were declarations of his presence. In the mortal world of Midgard, fields withered or flourished depending on his mood, and thunder was heard on windless nights as a sign of either wrath or protection. His name was etched into runes, whispered in sacred groves, and shouted on bloody battlefields. To men, he was a protector. To monsters, he was the storm incarnate. The 9 realms, ever fragile in their balance, began to fray. Portals opened where they should not have. Fire spilled from Muspelheim, frost leaked from Niflheim, and whispers in the world tree's roots foretold of an ancient unraveling. And when others hesitated, Thor acted. He rode across the Bifrost, not as a traveler, but as judgment. When the fire demons laid siege to Vanaheim with flame beasts, born of Surtur's breath, Thor descended like a thunderbolt, his chariot tearing through firestorms. Mjölnir blazed with blue lightning as he shattered their ranks, driving the infernal legions back into ash and silence. Even the elves of Alfheim, luminous and proud, bowed to him as he banished the creeping darkness of Svartalfheim with a storm so massive, it was said to have drowned a forest in seconds. Yet, Thor's thunder did not only cleanse, it sometimes scoured. In Jotunheim, his strikes shattered ice palaces and glaciers, leaving deep scars across the land. The frost giants, though hostile, were ancient beings of their own world, and some wondered if Thor's fury exceeded justice. In Niflheim, when a rebellion of forgotten spirits sought vengeance for centuries of silence. Thor's might ended the uprising, but left the realm stripped of its misty magic, its ethereal soul replaced by an eerie stillness. His power, unchecked, was awe-inspiring, but also terrifying. Even in Asgard, the whispers began. Odin, all-seeing and wise, watched his son with both pride and unease. Prophecies began to take shape in the fires of seers and the ink of scrolls. Visions of a thunder god whose fury would one day shake the roots of Yggdrasil itself. Could Thor's strength, so vital in this age of rising chaos, one day be the spark that ignites the twilight of the gods, Ragnarok? But Thor was not blind to these murmurings. Amidst the victories and war cries, he began to sense the danger of his path. Power without wisdom was ruin. He had learned to swing Mjölnir with precision, but had he learned restraint? When he stood beneath the canopy of the world tree, listening to the whisper of its leaves, he questioned not his strength, but his purpose. Could he be more than a god of war? Could he wield thunder as a tool of balance, not just force? His journey took him to the silent valleys of Midgard, where he walked among mortals without a crown or title, listening to their songs and fears. He sat with the healers of Vanaheim and heard the stories of those he once thought beneath notice. And in Alfheim, he stood beside light elf children who had once trembled at the storms he called, and now marveled at the rains he could gentle into life-giving showers. This was the beginning of a new struggle, not of battle, but of identity. Thor began to see that his greatest enemy was not a giant or a beast, but the part of him that believed only thunder could solve what thunder could not understand. And this realization would shape what came next, for destiny does not favor power alone. As new threats arose and love, betrayal, and sacrifice loomed on the horizon, Thor's inner war would rage louder than the storms he summoned. Though the echoes of Thor's thunder still rumbled through the 9 realms, a quieter storm was beginning to take shape within him. One not made of lightning, but of love, loyalty, and betrayal. Thor, who once saw the world in black and white, valor and villainy, strength and weakness, now found himself at the mercy of far more complex forces. The intricacies of the heart and the fragile nature of trust. His bond with Lady Sif, the golden-haired warrior of Asgard, had long been forged through shade battles and unspoken affection. Her presence was both grounding and fierce, a reminder of honor beyond power. But as Thor's journeys drew him closer to Midgard, another connection began to form. A mortal woman of great wisdom and kindness, with a spirit that mirrored his storm, wild yet yearning for peace. Between realms and promises, Thor stood torn. One offered duty and legacy, the other offered understanding, the kind even gods seldom receive. As he struggled with matters of the heart, trouble brewed beneath Asgard's golden spires. Loki, his adopted brother and master of mischief, grew increasingly bitter. Watching Thor bask in the love of gods and mortals alike, Loki's envy festered. In secret, he struck deals with dark forces in Svartalfheim and whispered lies in the ears of counselors. With a silver tongue, he sowed doubt that Thor's newfound compassion made him weak, that the god of thunder had lost his edge. The tension snapped when Loki revealed to the court a series of orchestrated illusions. False visions of Thor abandoning his duties, of him kneeling to mortals, of him casting aside his Asgardian kin. Though false, the damage was real. Odin's trust wavered, and the halls of Valaskjalf trembled not with thunder, but with distrust. Thor was exiled, not as punishment, but as a test. He was to prove that his loyalty to Asgard was not dimmed by his compassion. So he set off, not as a prince, not even as a god, but as a warrior seeking truth. On this path, he faced trials unlike any before. He'd fought not against monsters, but against impossible choices. In Vanaheim, he was forced to choose between saving a village from flooding or intercepting a dark envoy headed for Asgard. He chose the people, and Asgard paid the price. In Niflheim, He encountered souls of the dead, warriors he once felled, who now spoke to him not in anger, but in sorrow, reminding him that not all who fall are foes. The final test came in Muspelheim, where Surtur's flame walkers captured Loki, revealing his treachery had gone too far even for his own allies. Thor, despite the betrayal, fought through rivers of magma and storms of ash to rescue the very brother who tried to ruin him. When he emerged, scorched and bleeding, carrying Loki on his shoulders, the 9 realms remembered what honor truly meant. Thor returned not in triumph, but in silence. Odin, moved not by words but by actions, reinstated him not just as heir, but as protector of balance. A god who had walked through doubt and returned with purpose. Sif, watching from the ramparts, said nothing, but the look in her eyes held both pain and pride. Thor had passed the trial not just of heart, but of who he was beneath the lightning. Thor's return to Asgard marked the end of a brutal journey, but it did not mark peace. Though Odin restored his name and title, the cracks in the Golden Realm remained. Whispers still followed him, of divided loyalties, of a god who bent too close to mortal hearts, and of a warrior who hesitated where once he struck without question. Thor heard them all, but he did not flinch. He no longer sought to be the god Asgard wanted. He sought to be the god the realms needed. And yet, the matters of the heart, so deeply entwined with the trials of war, did not rest. His bond with Sif was now shadowed by distance. She had remained loyal, fought battles in his absence, defended his name even when others turned, but his soul had changed. The storm within him no longer rode only with war cries, but with questions of identity, of love's cost, and the lonely burden of power. Sif, ever the warrior, understood more than she let on. But in her silence, Thor felt the space grow between them. Meanwhile, Loki's recovery from Muspelheim was not without complication. His body healed faster than his mind, and guilt was a foreign feeling to him. Thor, for all the pain his brother caused, never once demanded an apology. Instead, he spoke to him of the things he saw, the villages he saved, the warriors he mourned, the innocents that suffered while gods bickered. Something in Loki shifted, but whether it was remorse or deeper schemes remained unknown. Still, their dynamic had changed. Thor no longer saw Loki as merely a trickster or rival. He saw a broken soul, desperate to matter, even if through chaos. To rebuild trust in the realms, Thor traveled again, this time with purpose. He met with the Vanir of Vanaheim, sharing wisdom from his exile. He forged new pacts in Alfheim, humbled himself before the Light Elves to admit Asgard's failures. He stood in silence atop the ruined temple of Hrimthurs in Jotunheim, where frost giants whispered of a coming fire that even they feared. Everywhere he went, Thor listened more than he spoke, and it was this humility that began to heal the fracture between God and world. Yet, peace is a brief dream for those who guard it. In the skies above, the ravens of Odin returned with grave omens. Prophecies long buried in the roots of Yggdrasil had begun to stir. Heimdall's horn vibrated with an eerie tension. The Norns whispered that the threads of fate were tightening, and in every corner of the 9 realms, the same word found voice: Ragnarok. And so Thor stood once again at the crossroads, not as the reckless thunderer, nor the banished prince, but as a man reforged by love, betrayal, and compassion. His journey had taught him that strength without empathy is tyranny, and that honor without sacrifice is hollow. With Mjölnir in his hand and storms at his back, Thor turned his gaze toward the horizon, where destiny's shadow loomed long and fierce. He was ready, not for battle, but for reckoning. The skies above Asgard turned darker with each passing moon. What once were whispers of fate had now become roars in the fabric of the 9 realms. The Bifrost flickered with instability, Yggdrasil trembled with ancient unrest, and Heimdall, ever the vigilant watcher, stood with a hand clenched tightly on Gjallarhorn, the soundless horn that could no longer ignore the echoes of doom. Ragnarok was no longer prophecy. It was approaching, swift and merciless, like the breaking of a dam. Thor felt it in his bones. The storms no longer obeyed as effortlessly. The thunder now came with resistance, like the realms themselves questioning his right to wield it. But doubt could not be afforded, not now. Odin called a final council of the gods, summoning Frigga, Tyr, Balder, and even Hel from her dark dominion. They spoke of the end, of the wolf Fenrir whose breath now clouded the edges of Midgard, of Jomungand who stirred in the depths of the sea, and of Surtur, the fire demon of Muspelheim, forging a blade that could burn all creation. All signs pointed to war, but Thor's greatest concern lay in the silence of Loki. His brother had vanished, neither seen nor sensed by gods or ravens. Some believed he had returned to his old schemes, others feared he had allied with the forces of destruction. Thor refused to accept either, but he knew that when Ragnarok began, Loki would not stand on the sidelines. The first strike fell not upon Asgard, but upon the mortal realm. Midgard was engulfed in unnatural storms and quakes, twisted creatures from Helheim and Muspelheim pouring through rifts like a plague. Thor descended like a tempest, not to rule or to be revered, but to protect. With Mjölnir roaring and lightning splitting the skies, he defended cities and souls alike, battling monstrosities that no longer feared godhood. Yet, in every battle, Thor felt the fraying edge of fate. The gods who fought beside him were strong, but few. Sif returned to stand at his side once more, her spear singing in unison with his hammer, their bond reforged in fire and purpose. Heimdall, knowing his death was foretold, stood taller, watching every flicker of time with defiance. Frigga summoned love as a shield, magic as a sword, and Odin, weary, fading, but proud, declared that the All-Father would fall not to prophecy, but in defense of his kin. As Asgard's gates opened for war, the skies split open with fire. Surt had arrived, a titan of flame whose sword scorched the very stars. And from the void beside him, two familiar eyes gleamed with ancient mischief and sorrow. Loki had returned, not as friend, nor as enemy, but as a harbinger of chaos, torn between love for his brother and loyalty to fate. Thor stepped forward, heart burning with rage, sadness, and unshakable purpose. The battle of Ragnarok had begun, not just for the fate of the gods, but for what they would become when the storm passed, if anything remained at all. The skies that once echoed with Thor's thunder now brooded with silence, an uneasy stillness that blanketed Asgard like a shroud. The wind carried whispers from the edges of the realms, unspoken warnings from Niflheim's frozen breath to Muspelheim's simmering fury. The roots of Yggdrasil groaned beneath the weight of destiny. Even the ravens Hugin and Mjölnir circled slower, as if wary of the future they observed. Heimdall's eyes never closed, scanning every thread of time with increasing urgency, for the tremors of Ragnarok no longer belonged to prophecy. They had begun to stir in the present. Thor stood before Mjolnir, no longer simply the god of thunder, but a guardian of all existence. His once effortless command of storms now came with resistance, as if the very fabric of the realms questioned their survival. He had seen omens in his dreams, seas boiling, skies ablaze, and gods falling like stars. Odin called a final Ylfing, summoning the last circle of Aesir and Vanir who still stood strong. Tyr, the war god whose hand never grew back, but whose courage never left. Frigga, radiant and wrathful, with magic pulsing in her veins. Balder, returned from Hel with light in his eyes and tragedy in his step. And even Hel herself, pale and poised, granting a grim neutrality to the conflict ahead. The room where they met felt heavy, like history folding in on itself. And yet, even in that gathering of legends, Loki was absent. Gone were his sleek jests and unpredictable smiles. Instead, only questions lingered. Had he returned to chaos? Was he the serpent beneath the world, or the outcast who still mourned what he had lost? Thor refused to speak against him, but in his heart, he knew that the next time they met, it might be as enemies. The first blow came not from Asgard or Jotunheim, but from within Midgard. Storms unlike any seen before ravaged the world of men. Red lightning, black rain, and tears in the sky, spilling demons and dead things. Cities turned to battlegrounds, and the people who once carved Thor's image in temples now cried out not for blessings, but for salvation. Thor descended in fury, not to be worshipped but to protect. With Mjölnir raised, he struck back the darkness, leveling monsters with bolts that split the earth. Every thunderclap was a cry of defiance. Sif stood beside him once more, the golden warrior whose love had never fully faded. Together, they moved like poetry in war, two forces of will, fighting for more than just survival. In the final hours before the last battle, Asgard fortified its golden halls. Heimdall sharpened his senses, knowing his own death would come by Loki's blade. The warriors of Valhalla stirred in their afterlives, summoned for one last stand. Odin donned his armor, not as a god, but as a father, ready to die so his sons might live. And deep within the sea, Jormungandr began to coil. From the shadows of fire, Surtur raised his burning sword, its flame brighter than suns. Then the sky cracked, and through it stepped chaos incarnate, Loki. Dressed in black and emerald, crowned with fire and frost, he stood beside Fenrir and Jormungandr, his eyes burning with sorrow, rage, and something else, guilt. Thor met his gaze, and in that moment, the past returned, their laughter, their rivalry, their broken promises. But neither spoke, for there was no time left for words. Surtur rode, and the first flames of Ragnarok kissed the gates of Asgard. Thor raised his hammer. For the realms, he whispered, and the world screamed. The final war tore through the 9 realms like wildfire through dry leaves. The Bifrost shattered under the weight of clashing gods and monsters, its once gleaming arch crumbling into the void. Asgard, home of the gods, became a battleground of chaos, its golden spires twisted by flame, its halls echoing with cries of the fallen. The armies of hell spilled forth, dead-eyed and relentless, while the forces of Jotunheim marched behind Fenrir's colossal shadow. Above them all, Surtur's blade carved the sky, a flaming crescent that threatened to swallow even the sun. Thor charged through the madness like a living storm. Mjölnir became a blur of light and fury in his hands, striking down giants like wheat before the scythe. He clashed with the wolf Fenrir, whose snarls broke mountains, and drove the beast back with thunderous force. But it was Jormungandr, the world serpent, who coiled from the oceans to face him, an ancient enemy whose venom had poisoned Midgard for centuries. Their duel shook the roots of Yggdrasil. Thor's lightning scorched the serpent's flesh, while Jormungandr's venom blackened the skies. In one final, devastating blow, Thor crushed the serpent's skull with Mjölnir, victorious, but not untouched. The venom coursed through his veins, and he stumbled, knowing he had only moments left. All around him, gods were falling. Heimdall and Loki met in a fatal embrace, both knowing it could end no other way. Odin was consumed by Fenrir's jaws, and in a blaze of vengeance, Vidar tore the beast apart. Sif fell by Thor's side, her hand reaching for his even in death. But it was Thor who stood alone at the end. His breath labored, blood mingled with the serpent's poison, eyes fixed on the burning horizon. With his last breath, Thor raised Mjölnir once more, not to strike, but to summon the storm, the pure, cleansing force of thunder that had always been his essence. The sky split open. Rain poured like tears from the heavens, quenching fire, silencing screams. The storm did not bring destruction, but rebirth. And as Mjölnir fell from his hand, the hammer vanished into the sky, carried by the wind to await the hand of a new hero. Thor collapsed as the dawn broke through the clouds. The old world ended, and from its ashes something stirred.